All right, with the 2024 season finally coming to its regular season conclusion, it's time to look back at Week 18 and see where we stand, especially now that we have seen some head coaching and general manager and other coach firings after the season after Black Monday. So let's go ahead and dive on in to this Week 18 recap. So kicking things off, we have the Cleveland Browns taking on the Baltimore Ravens. This one in Baltimore, big game for the Ravens. It was win and clinch the North and clinch a home playoff game. And they did just that. They went in, they scored every single quarter, winning by a final score of 35-10 over the Browns. And Cleveland, I mean, they were in it a little bit, and they were only in it, though, for about the first, half, and then it really started getting out of hand for them big time. At one point, they did make it a tighter game, but then Baltimore just kind of blew the door open in the fourth quarter. After the Browns finally scored a touchdown, Baltimore just blew the door open at the end and took over the rest of the game. As a result of this and the poor season for the Browns, they did end up firing two offensive coaches, offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey and offensive line coach Andy Dickerson. Two good moves. I think they should have gone a little bit further and fired Stefanski. I did voice my opinions on X, link down below. But I did voice my opinions yesterday. I think it's time for a fresh blood in Cleveland, because this has been a horrible experience. They've had a little bit of success under Stefanski, but for every success, they've had a failure, and it has not been pretty. For the Ravens, they are going into the playoffs very strong, very hot. Moving on to the Saturday night game, we have the Cincinnati Bengals going to Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers. For Cincinnati, this was a big game. They needed to win and get some help on Sunday, and they would be in the playoffs. For the Steelers, it was win and going into Saturday, potentially a win and in if Baltimore lost, but even at game time, it was win and lock up that 5 seed and lock up that game going to Houston. Well, how did it go? Pittsburgh lost. 19-17, it was not pretty. Cincinnati just was steady and consistent throughout the game. Pittsburgh could not get much of anything going. And then that last drive for clock management for the Steelers made Matt Eberflus look like a time management genius. It was awful. It was absolutely horrendous, and you could not go into the playoffs like this for the Steelers. They're looking very rough, they're struggling. They're limping into the playoffs, and the way they're playing, they are likely a one-and-done team unless they can get things clicking now. Actually clicking yesterday. As a result of this and their horrible season on defense, the Bengals did let go of defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo. He was fired because this team has had no defense all season, and it has been horrible. One of the worst defenses in the league, and really not giving Joe Burrow any help for his MVP caliber season. All right, now moving on to the Carolina Panthers going to Atlanta to take on the Falcons. This one was big, and if Atlanta was keeping track during the day, they knew it was big throughout the entire game. For Atlanta, it was a win and a Buccaneers loss, and they would be in the playoffs. And Tampa Bay, the way they were playing, they were looking like they might drop that game. So Atlanta really had a great shot, and they fell flat. I mean, it was a really great game by Bryce Young and the Panthers. 44-38 final score in overtime. Panthers end up getting the win. Taking a look at that box score, just absolutely incredible day for Bryce Young, going 25 for 34, throwing for 251 and 3 touchdowns. Michael Penix Jr. also having a phenomenal game himself, going 21 for 38 for 312 and 2 touchdowns, but to 1 interception. Both of these teams, I think, are future teams to carry this league. There's going to be a strong fight between these two teams I can see going forward for that NFC South, because they both have young quarterbacks that are starting to click and get things moving. So I really am looking forward to seeing what both of these teams can do, but for now, they're not in the playoffs. All right, now moving on to the Washington Commanders going to Dallas to take on the Cowboys. This game was not really a strong game for any implications. The Cowboys were eliminated. The Commanders had secured a playoff spot. They were just jostling for seeding. Win and they'd clinch the 6th seed. Lose and they'd potentially be the 7th seed if the Packers win. Ultimately, though, Washington getting the win, 23-19. But it was an ugly first half for Washington. They could not move the ball at all. This team struggled. I made a couple of posts about this once again on X during the game. It was a disastrous first half for Washington, and they just could not get anything going. Eventually, things did start clicking in the second half, and they got moving. But overall, this team needs to get more consistent and stronger if they're going to carry this into the playoffs. Because they were playing their starters, too, which makes it all the worse. All right, moving on to the Chicago Bears taking on the Green Bay Packers. This one was not really a big one for either team. Bears having been eliminated, not even fighting for the top seed. The Packers having clinched a playoff berth. They were just trying to jostle around for seeding. They did play their starters, though, and that might have come back to bite them in the butt. So the Bears ended up winning this one 24-22. It was a nice back and forth jostling game. I mean, it was 14-13 at the half, and it finished 24-22. You can't ask for a much tighter game than that. But the big thing for this, yes, the Bears got a big win at the end, which is a big statement for this franchise going forward. But Green Bay might have their playoff hopes in limbo on how far they can go, because Christian Watson, having feared to suffer a torn ACL, and I'm not sure what the injury was with Jordan Love, but he did go down with injury as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens here, because if Love is not going to be full strength for the playoffs, they're going to be going into Philadelphia, and it's a tough spot to play as it is. Even if they don't have Jalen Hurts, who is still in concussion protocol, they still have a solid team around them that any quarterback would do decent in that team. So Green Bay is seriously in trouble after those injuries if they turn out to be as serious as they seem to be. All right, moving on now to the Houston Texans going to Tennessee to take on the Titans. This game, the Texans ended up winning 23-14, and it worked out for both teams. Tennessee needing to have lost this game and get a little bit of help depending on what New England did to get the top pick in the draft, and Houston just trying to get themselves some momentum going into the playoffs because they had been struggling over these last few weeks after clinching the division. So really, both teams needed this game to go the way it did. Houston dominating the first half and carrying that momentum into the second half, even though they were outscored 11-7 in that second half. They still managed to secure that win, getting done what they needed to get done. Hopefully, it's a turning point for Houston, but once again, with their key injuries to wide receivers, it is going to be tough. All right, now moving on to the Jacksonville Jaguars going to Indianapolis to take on the Colts. This game, I have a lot to talk about, not just about what was on the field, but about the coaching situation. So let's go ahead and breeze through this game real quick as the Colts won 26-23. Really kind of a meaningless game. Jacksonville maybe jostling for a top 10 pick. Indianapolis was eliminated from playoff contention, so really this game didn't matter for them. The big news coming out of this game as the fallout, Doug Peterson was finally fired. We expected this to happen at some point in the season. I guess they didn't want to throw Trevor Lawrence in with another interim coach and then throw him again, because then that would have been Urban Meyer, the interim during Urban Meyer, Peterson's interim, and then a new head coach after that. That'll be 5 coaches for Trevor Lawrence, which is insane that Jacksonville just cannot get the coach right for Trevor Lawrence. The big negative, though, out of this game, there's a lot of negatives for both teams here. Jacksonville, the bad news, they are retaining Trent Baalke, which is absolutely horrendous. Baalke has not proven that he can make any competent moves, and yet they're bringing him back for a 5th season, which is absolutely embarrassing for this team. They should have fired Baalke years ago, and they still haven't done it. Meanwhile, for the Colts, the big bad news for them is that Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard are going to be coming back next year. These two have done nothing together. Shane Steichen had decent talent, and what did he do? He went under 500. He couldn't even manage to do well. He couldn't get the most out of Anthony Richardson, who was oozing with talent last year when he played. Before the injury, he was oozing with talent, and he hasn't done anything this year. It got to the point that you had to bench him for Joe Flacco, and then Richardson gets hurt again, so Flacco goes back in again. This team just could not get anything going out of their talent, and Chris Ballard not being able to get the right players in for Shane Steichen also was a big killer for this team. And they're both coming back next year. Clown shows in Indianapolis all throughout the season next year is what I expect. All right, now moving on to the Buffalo Bills going to New England to take on the Patriots. This game was big for New England because they needed to lose and clinch the top pick in the draft. Buffalo, they had locked up the 2 seed already, so really, they weren't going to fall, they weren't going to rise, they were just locked in, so they really didn't play their starters. I think they played Josh Allen for maybe 1 snap so that he kept his starting record. That's it. Bills ultimately went on to lose this game 23-16. The big story here out of this one is 2 for me. Nothing for Buffalo because they had their backups. I'm looking into New England on this one. After the game, they fired first-year coach Gerard Mayo, which I think it was a good thing that they fired him. He kind of got Lovie Smith because he won the game, screwed over the team from getting the top pick, and now got fired. But really, let's take a look at the season for Gerard Mayo. He had no passion. He had no fire. He had no chance of riling up his guys to get things going. He was just the guy that's like, oh, we're down 3 scores with 8 minutes to go, and they make a horrible call. Oh, well, it's bad. No, Any competent head coach that has passion for his team would immediately be in there, no matter the situation, saying, how the hell are you calling this the way you are? You are blind. This is the worst call I've seen. Not actually being aggressive towards the refs, but fighting, being passionate for his team. Rod Mayo didn't show that. And it was awful. He needed to go earlier, in my opinion, and he didn't. But I'm looking to what happened in the box score here. Drake May played to start the game. He played, I think, one snap. Yeah, he had one pass on the day. But I'm looking at Joe Milton. This man, against backups, mind you, it was backups. But he went 22 for 29, throwing for 241 yards and a touchdown. No interceptions. That is a very solid first game out, even if it is against backups. I really liked Drake May, and I still like May going forward. But Joe Milton showing his potential here, so if May doesn't pan out, they might have themselves a solid second quarterback if Drake May just doesn't fit the bill. So the Patriots, their least need is quarterback right now, if you ask me. All right, now moving on to the New York Giants, going to Philadelphia to take on the Eagles. The Giants, once having possession of the top pick in the draft, now needing help, assuming they would lose this game. They did lose it 20-13, and the Eagles, they're just too well built of a team. Even the backups and the backups could play well against a team like the Giants. This team is just too well built from the ground up. They're very deep, very strong, and very capable at all levels. This team has been very hot since their week 2 loss, I believe it was. Even though they lost to Washington during that stretch, it was going to happen at some point. The Giants, meanwhile, I don't know how to feel about the Giants, man. This is really not a good situation. So you go 3-14, and the owner says, I'm hoping things change soon, but we're going to trot back the same coach and same general manager. I don't think the problem was Brian Daboll. I think Brian Daboll should have stayed for another year because he has shown flashes of being a decent coach. My problem is with Joe Schoen. Joe Schoen has done nothing to help Brian Daboll. He has brought in no talent, and I'm looking at it from this way. We saw at Hard Knocks over the summer that Brian Daboll, he came in, he had his attitude of, so you want to be a Giant? But he wasn't the problem. Joe Schoen, I think, is the more incompetent in his job. Both of them are incompetent to a degree, but I want to see what Brian Daboll could do if he's given good players. Joe Schoen, on the other hand, he turned around to Saquon's agent and said, hey, man, I don't want to commit a number because I don't know the market. Like, what? You don't know the market for running backs for Saquon Barkley, and you're not going to even offer a number to negotiate on? You're just going to say we're not going to negotiate because we don't know the value? That is ridiculous. And then the fact that you have his own son saying, trade up, get Jaden Daniels, do something. You get this job only once. And Joe Schoen says, well, what if he's not available? What if he's not? Because he didn't want to go quarterback. He wanted to stay with Daniel Jones. And Daniel Jones is not a good quarterback when you don't have a good running game. So if you weren't going to go Daniel Jones, you needed to build that running game up, and you let Saquon walk. It makes no sense as roster construction, and he needed to go. And instead, they're running him back next year. Good job, Giants. All right, up next, a game that we don't really have too much to talk about here. The Saints versus Buccaneers. The Buccaneers win and clinch the South. Saints, they were pretty much done already. They were not really fighting for a top pick. They weren't fighting for the playoffs. They were just there. The Saints did end up losing this one 27-19, but not because they were dominated the whole game and tried to come back late. No. They were up 16-6 at the half, and this team was looking like they legitimately would have a chance at beating Tampa Bay and playing spoiler to the Buccaneers winning the 3 seed. Ultimately, it just came down to Tampa Bay getting at the end, getting hot at the right time at the end, and winning the game when it needed to. So they managed to clinch the division. It didn't matter because ultimately Atlanta lost, but still, knowing the game was on the line and knowing what was on the line with that game, they took care of business. But my big concern for Tampa is, can you get stronger in the playoffs? Right now, you're going to be going and playing Washington, looking at my whiteboard behind me where I got the whole playoffs. That's not going to be an easy fight for you. You got to get a bit stronger. If Washington plays the way they did this week, yeah, you might have a shot, but you can't rely on that. You got to be better as a team, and you better be more accountable to yourselves and not be in situations where you're down 16-6 at the half against the Saints. All right, this next one, let's be real. Chiefs starting their backups against the Broncos in Denver. Denver was winning in. Chiefs had nothing to play for. Denver dominates 38-0. Let's go ahead and move on. All right, moving on to the Los Angeles Chargers taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. This one was a decently big one in the AFC. The Raiders were trying to fight to get a little bit higher of a draft pick, jostling for position there. The Chargers were jostling for that position. They knew what was on the line. Win and face the Texans, lose and face the Ravens. They did not want to face the Ravens, so they went out and absolutely decimated the Raiders. This was not even close. The Raiders just were playing from behind the whole game and just absolutely struggled. So hopefully the Raiders can get something going because they already fired some offensive coaches. Hopefully they can change this around, but they did keep Antonio Pierce. I don't know if that was the right move for this team. All right, now we got the Seattle Seahawks taking on the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams having announced that they were going to be resting just about all of their starters, and it went about as well as you would expect. Even though the Rams knew it was on the line, you don't want to go and play Detroit or Minnesota. You knew you were playing Detroit or Minnesota if you lost and the Bucs won. That was just a given. And yet you still chose to rest your starters and go and take that chance. The Rams had a chance at winning. They tried to drive late. They couldn't punch it in. But the Seahawks winning 30-25. This game was ultimately meaningless for them, as once again, they had already been eliminated. So not really having too much going there. Really much of a nothing burger. The Rams slide down to the 4 seed, and now we know we'll face the Minnesota Vikings. And the Seahawks missed the playoffs. But they did fire their offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb. So we'll see what Seattle can do if they can maybe get a little bit more offense next year. All right, let's go ahead and move through this one real quick here. The New York Jets versus the Miami Dolphins in New York. The Jets winning 32-20. Dolphins knowing that they had to win and they would be in so long as the Broncos would lose. But everyone kind of knew the Broncos were going to win. So Miami losing really isn't too big. The big storyline coming out of that is twofold. Number one, Tyreek Hill, he's done. He changed his profile picture to the infamous Antonio Brown I'm out picture when he left the field during the game against the Jets as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. The other big story for the Dolphins is they chose to keep Mike McDaniel and Chris Grier. You know, I don't know who the problem is, whether it's Chris Grier bringing in, subprime talent or Mike McDaniel not, capitalizing on that talent, but really bringing back both of them is just going to give you more of the same for next year, more underperforming, more high expectations with nothing to show for it, and another mediocre season like this. So really, I don't know what to expect after that move and what the Dolphins expect to happen after that. Meanwhile, the Jets getting a win in Aaron Rodgers' likely final game as a Jet. The Jets probably going to end up cutting him, or Rodgers ended up retiring. It's still up in the air there. Rodgers, on people saying that, close to him that he's retiring, he's like, people say they're close to me? So, you never know. It's Aaron Rodgers. Let's move on. All right, up next, we got the most inconsequential game this week. No one fighting for draft position, no one fighting for a playoff spot. The Arizona Cardinals hosting the San Francisco 49ers. It was a tight game through 3 quarters, but Arizona did end up dominating 47-24. Let's go ahead and move on. Nothing really to show there. All right, and for the last game for this video, we have the Minnesota Vikings going to Detroit to take on the Lions. The winner would be 15-2 and the top seed in the NFC with a first-round bye. The second team, or the loser, would be 14-3 and a wild card entry going to Los Angeles to take on the Rams. This game, though, let's be real. Detroit went out and they owned it. They dominated. They did everything they needed to do and absolutely decimated Minnesota for 4 quarters. Minnesota just could not get any offense going. Sam Darnold went back to his Jets days, and the defense just could not hold the Lions. They tried, but they just couldn't. Really, this falls on Sam Darnold and just some, rough situations there. The Lions just really playing well through injury on defense. This team is looking hot. Minnesota now going to be entering the playoffs pissed and frustrated and upset and going back to Los Angeles where they lost by a final score of 30-20 against the Rams earlier in the season, looking to avenge that loss and move on to the divisional round to try and get some revenge on the Lions at some point in the playoffs. Will they do it? We'll have to see. Alright, well that is going to do it for this video. If you guys did like, don't forget to smash like and subscribe. It does help me out a whole lot. We're on the grind to 50 subscribers. We are only 4 clicks that button away, so scrolling below the video does help us out a whole lot if you click that button. Also, leave a comment down below. What do you think of Week 18? What do you think of the playoffs? Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear what you guys have to say, and I will catch you guys later. Peace out, and have a good one.